So it may be somehow not just wrong, but also inefficacious to ask Christ Logos to be in the ear that hears this um, voice and to record it faithfully, given that this recording is about Heidegger, and Heidegger would seem to repudiate the logos, as he repeatedly tells us the logos has something to do with calculation, with calculativity. Um, but in any case, I apologize for the last video, and I know that it is great fun and a delight to have the video cut off like that midstream. I offer up, not because it's exactly right where we were, but just for Heideggerian poetry, another of the reflections on the two sides of forgetting and on the eidos of forgetting, let's say. By the way, I would say Heidegger's reinterprets Plato in a way that gives the eidos a new liveliness. But let's look at this citation. Forgetting oneself, losing one's composure, not retaining oneself, the quote-unquote genuine self is quote-unquote gone. Then the other side, as pure devotion, comma, from the greatest composure, comma, quote-unquote oneself, the quote-unquote self, the improper, quote-unquote gone. We think somewhat in the Eastern way, in the second way, gone, gone, gone to the furthest shore. So forgetting oneself can mean totally opposed things. It seems to me that when Heidegger thinks Plato, when he looks at the, it's possible to read Plato always as this is sending up to the Socratic interpretation of some matter, such as Eros in the Symposium, and then you say, oh, that's the what Socrates or Dike or Justice in the Republic or Politeia, and then you say, there, now we know what Plato thought about the matter, and it was this, and this is the Platonic teaching. But the way Heidegger teaches it is by showing through, I suppose he uses the seventh letter as evidence, but I'm not sure that that's exactly cogent, because everybody already had access to that. But it seems to me that what he says when he says that simply the showing of the whole range and that we can look at it shows us really what the being of Eros is, or the being of justice, and so on. Because when you bring in the sense that Socrates is showing us, as it were, the wisest vision of this eidos, which is referred to, by the way, as the Aristos. And in the Politeia, they never call that the ideal or so, or something like that. They call it the Aristos, the best. So the best Politeia regime, for instance. There you can see this movement of best to worst as within a certain compartment of ontology, which is, let's say, the theological compartment. And, Heidegger is always saying one of his favorite contradictions, or contradictions in terms, was the I forget, actually, now that I'm to get to this one. Theological philosophy, is that what he's saying? No, sorry, Christian philosophy. Because, in other words, the Christians are theologians, and the theologian A theologian surprisingly doesn't have to think in terms of conscious or ethics at all. In fact, there's not even an ethics in Thomas, because the reason is they're still thinking in the sense of the good in the Platonic sense, so that what he's trying to show us is the understanding of the fullness of being and the fulfillment of the good. And this is a higher lower movement, but anything of this sort falls within, as Heidegger sees it, the whole eidos of the good. It includes the worst forms also. And this gets us closer to understanding Facticitat than the datum of Dasein. As I'm going forward, I should say, I'm not attempting to repeat everything lost in the last video, but only to bring it out by and by instead of to say exactly what I said there. But still trying to get to this attempt to see what has become of freedom when we are Dasein rather than when we are a rational subject or an animal of some kind, or an ancient Greek, and so on. I do think it's clear that yes, we will be repelled by Christ's logos so far as we're proper students of Heidegger, because we have said the logos is this which objectifies, and even at its highest point, even so far as it seems to burn over and beyond the perfect round circle of the good, it still does not get out of whatever it would do. It still remains logos. It still remains word, and therefore, so far, it still remains totally bound to the object. It's objectifying, and I think that's inescapable. So that covers over the whole development of Athens into these later Christian forms and the rest of the tradition. So Heidegger needs to show the cogency of this break, definitely, for us to come over to that view, as it were. So Strauss is saying, what I was getting to is that I want to see if we can find a correspondent from the ordinary claims that the Athenians made about the truth of the greatest driver of politics. Politics understood as a form of the word polis, and from that origin, which is somewhat mysterious because we don't have that form anymore, unless you would try to artificially count the Vatican City or some examples such as that. And I want to make an analogy between what own means from the Greek account, as understood, especially by Strauss, but by many others also, and what it would mean in the context of Dasein. In the regular context, that means that one has one's own countries, such as Russia, and then there's also a regime which corresponds to the subject matter of the politeia, which is customarily called a republic. And that regime would be the Russian Federation right now, and shortly, not so long in the not so distant past, it was about 30 years ago now, it was the Soviet Union still, which was a regime of probably a more majestic magnitude, but nonetheless, these are both regimes, organic regimes, as it were, not the pure types as we see in this differentiation between, for instance, the democratic type and the aristocratic type of governance. I think that and how so far does this having one's own and being in contention with the say the play that's currently being put on in the country, how so far does this lead us to need to answer this question of the remembrance of remembering that which is forgotten in these other senses. Um, in great part, all the irrationality is put on the idea of the one who refuses to go along with the regime. And this is like the mother who refuses to recognize her child is terrible. She knows the child is terrible, but it's her own child. And then this harms the community, and it's irrational, supposedly, which makes one feel suspect of rationality in some sense, in some deep sense. Thus encouraging, I would say, further the view that Heidegger was actually simply an authoritarian of some stripe, and not democrat. He hated democracy or some such, because actually Adorno did come out with this idea of the democratic personality and the authoritarian personality, and he made all kinds of social study. He made a big social study on that theme, and in any case, which connects to the other recording about the contrast between the Frankfurt School and Heidegger, let's say. But what I wanted to propose is that one can understand the Faktizitat, the datum of Dasein properly as what is its own. So remembering that we're not talking here about the Tatsache in the sense of facts, in the sense that Nietzsche was polemicizing with. We're not talking about either this the phenomena in this word, which is almost the same in every language, so far as I can see. Nobody makes any attempt to translate it, in the sense that Nietzsche spoke with the tradition when he says we can't go from the phenomena to the truth, from the appearance to the truth. The very concept of appearance implies something that the appearance is of, and from the point of view of the Greek thinking. From Heidegger, it's not quite the same, I would say, because the appearance involves this circular motion, as it seems, within the antagonism of that which is within itself. The showing itself from itself somehow involves the whole of Dasein from Heidegger's point of view. But so let's try to think how Faktizitat, which is the whole datum of Dasein, which I take to be all beings, everything, it is not discriminated against, including that nothing is, as it were, in the old Parmenidean phrase, because that's still brought forward as an object. But then also this crack where it includes also this knowledge that we are only limited to objectifying through words, but there must be something beyond language, as Wittgenstein says he understands that Heidegger was speaking of.